This is episode 685 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, we are in the thick of it in the Roundhouse up there in Santa Fe. Just hit the halfway mark, which is kind of when the stuff really starts to hit the fan in Santa Fe in terms of bills of one kind or another. And I know it is shocking to our listeners, but as is usually the case, it is a lot of bad bills moving, and most of the good bills are falling by the wayside, and we're just trying to hold on for the best we can here in this 60-day legislative session. So doesn't mean the news is all bad. It just means that we're fighting a lot of rearguard battles here in this legislative session because of the makeup of the legislative session, which was determined in November. So if we want to do better in the session, we need to do better in November. And one of those bills is HB 11. This is the artist formerly known as paid family leave. It is now called Welcome Child and Family Wellness Leave. And it moved through the House Commerce Committee as a relatively dramatically revised bill. A few of the highlights: it's now 6 weeks a year of paid leave for sickness and whatnot, 12 weeks for a child or the adoption of a child being born. There is a $3,000 welcome child, quote unquote, refund. We'll talk a little bit about that and issues with that, but that's $3,000 over 3 months, so $9,000. And then some reductions in the level of taxes paid by employees and employers into the program. So again, passed out of House Health in a previous different form, revised dramatically to the point where it's a much, much different bill in House Commerce. But still, it heads on to the House floor where it could be voted on any day now.
Yes, Paul, and I looked at that bill more than I care to, but there's a number of things about it. Is one of them is for the birth benefit and all of that. There's no funding source identified. And so we're talking, I did a few calculations, and I'm not saying that these are right, but they're somewhere in the $100 to $300 million a year range, and no funding source. As we say, problem. That's a problem. And then the other is, as you said, they reduced the deductions on employers and employees because that benefit is smaller, but it still looks to me like it's got a very good chance of running out of money very, very quickly. So, who knows? But here's the thing about that bill. There's been no fiscal impact report done on it. So the folks that at least do their best to take a swag at what the impact of this would be haven't even had a chance to look at it. So we'll see what happens with this. If this one passes, there are huge problems with it, and I have a feeling that the Senate would have to do something to it to fix it. What that might be, I don't know. But they, like I say, the fact that you don't fund a big chunk of the bill, that's got to be a problem.
Yeah, I think the solvency issue really is the critical factor here. Now, that has not stopped New Mexico's politicians from passing bad ideas in the past, especially when they have this kind of oil and gas revenue available to them. They could pass it and just figure it out later. It wouldn't be beyond the realm of possibility, or they could make further changes to the bill. But there's really been no serious analysis of the financial impact on New Mexico of this plan in its new revised form, and it's just one of the myriad problems with this the way the legislature works in Santa Fe in terms of how you can take a bill, revise it uh, in one committee with limited analysis, then onto the House floor, which is really where we believe and have believed the entire time that uh, this thing lives or dies on the House floor. If they get it through the House, they'll be able to get it through the Senate and in whatever form they choose. There are enough far left progressives in terms of numbers in the Senate that I think they can move it through that body with relatively few problems. I think the only perhaps catching point in the Senate would be George Munoz and Senate Finance Committee. I think this bill has to go through the Senate Finance Committee, and uh, as we are going to discuss momentarily, the Senate Finance Committee put the kibosh on another progressive agenda item, and anybody who has the slightest clue about financials and the idea of these kinds of entitlement programs is really going to need to carefully look at this program and have some better analysis than what's been done so far.
Yeah, and Paul, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. We're not sure if this will pass or maybe they'll amend it on the House floor before it goes over. But it does look like at the rate it's going, a really unworkable bill may pass the House, and then the Senate, it'll be up to the Senate to fix it and then have it go to reconciliation, between the two bodies, or if there's time to send it back if they start it under another number. There's a lot of things that can happen. But the point is that in its current form, or any of the forms that have been presented to this point, really a pretty bad bill for New Mexico. It's very, very damaging to business interests. And I was thinking about this a little earlier. It's like the state legislature does not seem to be adverse to doing things to make business worse, harder, reduce it, destroy it, and then come in on the backside and say, but oh, look, there's this government program that can really help you out. And, it's one of those things, most of the things that they put out there in terms of overcoming their bad policies by creating another benefit like this is the one would be really much better addressed if we just would do something to make our business environment more friendly. We could grow jobs that have a lot of good benefits as opposed to the way we're doing it, which is rely on oil and gas and hope for the best.
Well, another bill, HB 417, passed through the House Tax Committee yesterday. This is the compromise among the progressives in terms of taxing alcohol is to impose a 6% tax across the board, kind of a point of sale tax in addition to all the additional alcohol taxes, including the gross receipts tax on alcohol. So, uh, adding in a fairly steep tax and then dedicating it to um, treatments and whatnot. So we've got no issue with the treatment aspect of this particular tax, but
And just know, though, Paul, those allocations only last until they don't. Meaning that
exactly.
a future they a lot of times don't even make it through the session in which they're enacted until the money is kind of carved off for other purposes other than what they're advertised to be.
True, but the most critical aspect of this HB 417 is that it's already been changed as well. This one will, in theory, and this is going to be one of those another interesting how they implement it if this actually gets through, that they would not tax at the 6% rate New Mexico beer, wine, and spirits, which really kind of takes away from the whole case that this is all about solving our alcohol abuse problems at the state level because last I checked, a drunk does not just focus on where they're, getting their alcohol from Bud Light or God knows what other source of alcohol, not New Mexico alcohol, that's okay. I just think this is obviously purely politically oriented. The whole thing is another revenue grab, and they just don't want to attack or be seen as attacking New Mexico producers of alcohol at all different types of alcohol. So again, this was partisan. Democrats supported it, Republicans opposed it, and we'll see where HB 417 goes. But
Yeah, and when you get as granular as they're getting on this, I do think that in its current form, it may have some issues with the Constitution of the state of New Mexico. There's a couple provisions that I think it may directly violate. You also have the Interstate Commerce
yep,
Act and the
the
Commerce
federal
Clause
interstate commerce.
at
Yeah.
the federal level,
Mhm.
and so if you're doing some things differently, so we will see. So yeah, to say they've gotten a little quote unquote cute with this and gone beyond anything to do with uh, with their initial stated purpose. And so another way of saying it is if you get drunk and become an alcoholic on New Mexico, beer, wine, and spirits, everything's good. So yeah, again, why are we doing this bill? It's of limited effectiveness. It's a regressive tax. And it covers everybody. And just what's the need for it?
Yeah, I mean, the Interstate Commerce Clause, U.S. Constitution, one of the things that that clause is meant to do is to make sure that states do not treat products from the other 49 states unfairly, unlike they treat products in their own states. Now, if you want to put forth a tax credit, there is a lower tax or a tax advantage on locally produced alcohol, but that's done a little differently at the input level, not at the output level. I just have a feeling that if this in its current form was passed into law and went into a federal court, that it would probably get tossed because of that discriminatory end of use tax. I just think they're going to treat that differently than uh, the advantages given to some of the domestic producers, domestic as in New Mexico based producers, uh, when they are trying to encourage those businesses as they have with tax policy over the years.
Yeah, and maybe a way around that would be to say that that the Commerce Clause would not apply if spirits produced in New Mexico are never exported. But guess what? The breweries, they want to sell their product not only in New Mexico but other places as well.
Yeah. So, yet another bill that we're talking about here is SB 85, which is an attack on free speech and specifically efforts by groups like Rio Grande Foundation to engage in the political process. This one definitely not getting the same amount of coverage as you'd get from uh, a lot of these other issues, a lot of these other bills. But this is an effort to make it more difficult for third party organizations such as the Rio Grande Foundation to engage in New Mexico political campaigns and just engage in uh, advocacy around political issues anywhere near an election. It's Peter Worth, who has really been uh, you could call him a leader, somebody who uh, has attempted repeatedly to limit free speech in the state of New Mexico. Uh, he is behind this particular legislation. He's actively engaged in passing anti speech laws in the past. And yet again, he is engaged in this process. The bill, SB 85, actually passed through the Senate very, very quickly. Unfortunately, with little to no opposition, including among Republicans. And now it is heading on to the House, where hopefully we can push back against that as well. But this is more one of those systemic and free speech issues that understandably the average person may not have this at the top of their list of bills in the session. But when it really impacts the ability of RGF and other organizations to engage in the political process, that is a concern that needs to be addressed.
And Paul, my big interest in this bill, were it to pass, would be, using the biblical quote, "The bill may fall on the just and the unjust alike." Is what would it do to the political left side of the spectrum to have to comply with this, or have they figured out a way that it would just apply to evil free market organizations, pun intended there. So this is one is like but this eliminates free speech, but in a good way. So that seems to be its marketing.
Yeah, obviously in a blue state like New Mexico, the enforcement is critical because the Democrats do control the process, so they can certainly look at things with a more jaundiced eye that come from an organization like Rio Grande Foundation, where we're already known to be so-called bullying the politicians, which of course you have to go back a few episodes to see what I mean by that facetious statement. But the difference between what a Rio Grande Foundation or a conservative organization would do and what a liberal organization could get away with is going to, I think, be very challenging to overcome. So, sometimes it could be progressive organizations if they come after the mainstream Democrats for something that they don't like. Definitely, that could draw the ire of the powers that be, but I have no doubt that the primary focus would be the political right and their activities, our activities, so to speak. So, SB 4, another bill. This one was net zero, and another one that just was heard yesterday in Senate Finance Committee, and thankfully, some sanity prevailed in Santa Fe. This bill was tabled, which means it is likely dead. Now, net zero, and I want to have a little more conversation with you, Wally, about net zero. We signed a letter opposing it. The idea of net zero is, I think, just an absurdity on its face. But the bill died with two Democrats, George Munoz, chair of the Finance Committee, and Benny Shindo, a Native American member of the Finance Committee as well. Those two, along with all the Republicans, opposed SB 4. And the reality of net zero is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, so a state like New Mexico goes and adopts net zero, saying we are not going to produce any more CO2 in New Mexico by 2050, phased in, of course, over time. Then we no more production than we somehow store or limit. And
take out through direct air capture, carbon capture, whatever.
Now, this would not apply. So if you import a electric vehicle, for example, into New Mexico, that doesn't count. Theoretically, all of the inputs of the CO2 emissions, the manufacturer, the battery, all of that is done.
The mining for the lithium, wherever that's done.
Outside New Mexico. And then magically the EV comes here to us. And as long as it's wind and solar, or heaven forbid, nuclear, it doesn't count against our goals. But it definitely, the oil and gas industry, any other, gas-powered vehicles, it doesn't mean that it's cleaner overall. You're just shifting the CO2 emissions either out of state or out of country. So that is one of the reasons why the advocates, the people who pushed back so eloquently did so, is because you're potentially not even having a positive overall impact on global CO2 emissions. You're likely shifting them to China, where it's dirtier, objectively dirtier, and more CO2, or other states that don't have the kind of rules and regulations, such as Texas, that we would have on the books. Now, thankfully, this thing did fail, but give us your perspective on net zero.
Well, net zero is a dangerous pipe dream. Not all pipe dreams are dangerous. And the reason it is that there's no way to get there. And anything that's been done, they assume that the fair-haired children of the net zero movement, wind and solar, have no impact on the environment, and that those technologies are able to power a modern industrialized society like the one we have in the United States, and like the entire world aspires to. And so, yes, when we say net zero, it's possible for New Mexico to get there, although very difficult, really. It's going to be very, very difficult. And let me just say, let me cite none other than the World Economic Forum that
Ooh.
just says that despite despite years of effort, we're not doing what we need to do. And urgent and coordinated global action is needed within the next decade to combat the growing climate change threat. So, what do we do in the U.S.? We are able to shut down our coal-fired power plants because, in the meantime, we have abundant and cheap natural gas that's associated gas, meaning gas related to the production of oil and gas. And in places like the desert Southwest in New Mexico, it's a pretty good place for wind, very good place for solar, but that isn't the whole country. And so, just because we do things in New Mexico doesn't mean it's going to make a bit of difference. And if we're importing things from China, China uses coal, and more coal. Now, you will see things that says, well, China has more electric vehicles than, they've done all these great numbers. And yeah, why have they done that? Because they don't want to have to import oil, and they have coal. So China's electric cars truly are coal cars, and becoming more and more coal cars as things go on. And so there is this just weird, and like I say, Paul, anytime I hear by the year, whatever it is, this emission or that emission or this will be reduced, and again, net zero by 2050, we'll be at net zero. It's it's dangerous, and I do believe the reason it's dangerous is that even if you believe that reducing emissions is a good thing, I think this idea of the perfect becomes an enemy of the good, meaning some things that could be done to dramatically reduce emissions aren't done because, that will never be net zero. We only do net zero things, which means you're doing things that are not necessarily going to be effective in huge swaths of the economy. So I think it's good New Mexico didn't do this. The other thing is that, in our oil and gas industry, to get to net zero, I believe that would be just on production. Most of the oil leaves the state and goes elsewhere. Good luck getting that to be net zero anytime soon. So, there are just a lot
Well, I mean,
of.
I think this is explicitly designed to kill the oil and gas industry in New Mexico. And yeah, that's part of the problem is
Yeah.
where it's produced is the issue. Now, of course, if there were a plan, shall we say, undertaken in the New Mexico legislature to incentivize and encourage in some of the same ways we've seen renewables, so-called renewables, wind and
Yeah.
solar,
Big tax credits.
yeah, offered to producers of nuclear power, we, as a component or maybe as a separate initiative related to this idea. At least I would say they have a credible plan for reducing CO2 emissions in the state of New Mexico. That is not at all what we're seeing here. of
No,
course.
not at all. And so right now, the alternative energy system to do any of what they're planning to do literally doesn't exist.
Right.
And I will say that wind and solar aren't going to get any better. They just they'll get very small incremental benefits, but they're pretty much there. It's all in batteries now, and the lithium ion battery is, it's horrible. It's the
Mhm.
best we have, but it's horrible. So if we were to get a 10 or 100 times improvement in battery technology, some of these things might be able to happen. And then the other thing, just I'll put it out there, is the quote unquote cold fusion or the fusion reactor. Boy, that that's been around for a long time, and that has not made progress. And every time you'll see the big press release that we're almost there on that, but the things that actually can and do work in the short term, to do dramatic reductions, things like nuclear, they're just not on the table. And so I don't know. Maybe this is the way of encouraging, uh, battery scientists and researchers to really step up their game, because without literally orders of magnitude, hundreds and thousands of times better than batteries, these net zero goals are crazily just they're inane. And places like China, they add coal plants on a weekly basis because they have coal, and coal's easy to get, coal's cheap, and the green energy revolution, to the extent it originates in China's manufacturing, is powered by coal.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, for a change, we had a positive result there in Santa Fe. So another session, and thankfully, net zero is not going to happen in 2025's
Yeah,
session.
for now.
So moving on to the future of New Mexico, Deb Haaland, of course, running for governor, very well known at this point. I pinned an article for National Review Online that appeared uh, Friday, February 21st, in which I go into some detail about her biography and her record. Um, she's she's been in Congress. She was there for a little over one term, 2-year term in office. She was a reliable supporter of all the left wing policies, Green New Deal, opposing fracking on federal lands. She, I think, uniquely made some very strong public statements about the Covcath kids who had a confrontation, if you will, in Washington, D.C. at the pro life rally up there. And she called them full of blatant hate, disrespect, and intolerance, when reality was that they were being remarkably poised as they were being shouted at by left wing activists. Um, Nick Sandman, who got a $275 million payout from CNN, uh, was ready to file or filed a libel lawsuit, but that was dismissed because Holland was a member of Congress, and that was seen as made in the scope of her employment. Uh, Holland got crossways with the native Navajo with her 10-mile arbitrary radius around Chaco Canyon, and the leaseholders up there who wound up protesting and even blocking her way on one of the roads in and out of Chaco when they were really expressing their outrage about this policy. And finally, I argue that when it comes to the price of oil and, of course, gas at the pump, uh, Holland's had probably more to do with the Biden administration's failure to reduce those prices. Because if there's one thing that the U.S. President can do, especially in the modern era, to really moderate out of control gasoline prices at the pump, it is through uh, raising the amount of production that happens on federal lands managed by the U.S. government, BLM lands in particular, under the auspices of the Department of Interior. And just to say clearly, Haaland did not do anything to change that. Of course, she was being, I'm sure, directed by her superiors all the way up to the President of the United States. Perhaps. We don't know what Biden was doing.
Or whoever was sending out instructions under his signature.
Exactly. So, yeah, if Haaland were to be elected governor, that would be a total disaster for the state of New Mexico, just to be clear.
Well, and as I think about this, and this is New Mexico, so this may not be as big of an issue, but during the presidential campaign, candidate Harris was asked to what she would do different than what Biden did, and she frankly didn't have an answer. And I really do think that based on Deb Haaland's background and the policies that she's supported over the years in her various roles, she's very close to the core of extreme Bidenism. And so, is that something that New Mexicans are even going to care about or relate to? But it is, I do think it's a big issue because there's not a different model other than that far left, progressive kind of environmental model that Haaland's been associated with her whole career. So, what would that mean for the state of New Mexico? If she's, if Michelle Lujan Grisham is really the center-right candidate, relatively speaking, if Haaland were to be far left compared to Grisham.
Yeah. I don't want to give Lujan Grisham that kind of credit. But
no, I'm just saying by comparison, the scales in New Mexico are the chart or the timeline in New Mexico. The gradients seem to be shifting a lot.
Well, I will note that all is not lost, even on the Democratic side. Former Las Cruces Mayor Ken Miyagishima has announced that he may run for governor. That generally means that he will run for governor. And he even said he would do things 90% differently than Michelle Lujan Grisham. He was notably, I'm not too familiar. I know Las Cruces in general has moved quite far to the left, but Miyagishima was a voice of sanity on some of the COVID mask mandates and other rules later on in Michelle Lujan Grisham's term, when she was kind of one of the bitter clingers out there among the far left progressive Democrats. So Miyagishima would be at least a voice of reason on the Democratic side of the aisle. Whether that gets you to a majority in a Democrat primary, I don't know the answer to that. It does seem that the Democratic Party, as well as their candidates, have moved far, far to the left. And I think it's going to be a challenge for Miyagishima to bring sanity to that primary race. But, we'll see. The race is not even on yet. It is very much taking shape at this point.
Hey, and Paula, on the topic of that primary race, there was a law that would make it a lot easier to vote in the primary of your choosing. Is that one that the Rio Grande Foundation is following? Because I do think that as the Democratic Party has gotten to be very, very far left, I think there may be, anything, a bill like that may make certain candidates more attractive in the primary, just because, frankly, Republicans could cross the line to vote in the Democratic primary more easily.
Yeah. So the New Mexico Senate a week ago passed a bill to allow independents to vote in primaries. It's called semi-open primaries. It's SB 16. It passed on a 27-11 vote. Now, this is one where, let me state this first. And so we're just going to go a little bit long today on the show, but that's because 'tis the season, right, folks? This is one where I think we deviate from a lot of the views of the Republicans. I'm not a believer that election processes outside of voter ID and making sure integrity is adhered to, that all of these are going to have dramatic changes one way or the other. But yes, enabling people to, on the independent side, vote for, in that given election, one party or the other, is what they're talking about. It's not a permanent choice saying, oh, I'm no longer independent, I'm now a Republican or a Democrat, but it is allowing them to vote in one of the two primaries if you're an independent. Now, we'll see. Obviously, the Republicans are going to have a primary, I presume, for governor. And you could always have a situation where some number of Republicans move across the aisle or move their voting designation from R to D, or independents in great numbers move from independent to, at least for this election, going into the Democratic camp. Uh, it's a proposition. I could certainly see a scenario where, if I thought Miyagishima had a chance, that I would switch my registration just to stop Deb Haaland, because I think Deb Haaland is dangerous enough to this state that I think we would see significant declines from already low levels in terms of our achievement and economic situation. We would see significant decline under Deb Haaland. And so I could see some effort, if this bill passes, that would be undertaken by some number of people.
Yeah, because, at the end of the day, Paul, your party registration in New Mexico right now, it's huge, because if you're a Republican, you only vote in the Republican primary. If you're an independent, there is no primary. If you're green, there is no candidate. It doesn't matter. And so this would make it easy to say that it would make it, I think, much easier for people to say, well, to the extent there are many more choices in the primary, I will be a Democratic Party primary voter, and then I'll vote however I want to vote in the general election. Well, you always can vote however you want in the general election. But, I do think that this thing, on balance, could be something that, at least in the short term, could, shall we say, bring more moderate Ds to the general election. That's my theory. I don't know if it's true or not.
Or at least bring some independents who could be a moderating force into this and other elections. So yeah, it's certainly, I like to say that at the Rio Grande Foundation, we focus on the clear shots, the clearly bad or clearly good
Yes,
bill.
I'm with you.
We do, we have talked to people involved in this effort, and it's certainly not something that we're going to oppose, whether it's something that we want to be, associated with. We have rated it, I think, a +2 or something in the Freedom Index. So I think that the process has sufficiently failed New Mexico's conservatives and libertarians and those who want to see New Mexico thrive. So this is one relatively moderate change to the election process that I think could have some positive outcomes. It could have negative outcomes. I'm not saying it's all one or the other. I'm just not going to really push against this thing. So we do need to move on. And the latest from our good friends at the State Investment Council, who have all the money in New Mexico. Hate to say it, it's really unbelievable how much money they have now. According to yet another new article, lawmakers look to build up future money with investment funds. Daniel Chacon, Santa Fe, New Mexican, February 22nd, 2025. John Clark of the State Investment Council, he has a lot on his mind with the fact that he oversees more than $61 billion in total assets. That's up from $58 billion just a few weeks ago, and $54 billion a few months ago. And it seems like this amount of money under the State Investment Council just keeps growing and growing and growing. And the article does talk about how there were plans for all manner of new so-called permanent funds, which we at the Rio Grande Foundation have strongly opposed. We are tired of the government acquiring and sitting on more and more money. That money needs to be returned to average New Mexicans. And it's just ridiculous. $61 billion under New Mexico government control, while we have one of the poorest populations in the country, the most dependent on oil and gas, et cetera, et cetera. And Wally, I'm going to combine a couple of subjects and note that the budget was passed by the House in Santa Fe. And one of the provisions considered an amendment to the budget. The Republicans put forth a $600 rebate, dividend check, they call it, for each man, woman, and child in the state. So not the plan we would want, but if you're not going to cut taxes, I would take a $600 rebate for my family. That's 5 people, $3,000 handed over to the Guessing family. It's better than the alternative of the government just sitting on it. So one of the points that the Democrats make is that they believe it would violate the state's anti-donation clause that prohibits state dollars being funneled to private parties. They've done rebates in the past.
Okay, where were they in COVID when this happens? I just say I call BS on that. That is some mighty weak sauce of an argument that a tax rebate would violate the anti-donation clause, which, by the way, the anti-donation clause is the toothless tiger of New Mexico politics.
We could call it the Schrodinger's anti-donation clause.
Exactly. Is it or isn't it?
Yeah. Any thoughts on the effort to the amount of money tied up in the state, as well as the $600 rebates and the budget in general?
Well, I would like them to eliminate all permanent funds and give $30,500 to every man, woman, and child living in the state of New Mexico, and do that 1 year from now. And just see what happens. And I put that number out there to just show the scale of that's out there.
$3,500 doesn't even begin.
30,000.
30,000. Okay.
30,500.
Got it.
So
okay.
right shy of 31,000.
Now we're talking.
So it's interesting. New Mexico is kind of finding itself in a place maybe similar to how the robber barons did. A lot of them set up foundations that after their death turned and went in a completely different direction. So rather than, and I call it investing, but let's just say not taking. So either spending the money on things that could help the economy, could help the state go forward, help it to thrive. And some of those include things like eliminating the state income tax, reforming the gross receipts tax, funding certain items that we say are important, like Children, Youth, and Families Department, disability waivers that just always get a lot of hand waving but no money. Do some things like that. Would that improve the state? Probably would. I don't know if it would for sure, but I think it stands a good shot. As it is now, we find ourselves, what shall we say, cash rich and policy poor. We just lack a vision. We lack a set of policies from a political point of view that are, 1, doable, and 2, would be effective in moving the state forward. And, we're back to education, crime, healthcare, tax policy. I think those are the ones that could be directly impacted with proper legislation and a will. But, those don't even, we almost are talking about crime, but not really this session. We have a few pretty watered down, will they be helpful provisions? Maybe minor, they might move the needle a little bit, but not, there's not a whole lot of hope on either side that they're going to make a big difference. And what do? Let's just, we have that money in the bank for a future day when maybe somebody smarter than us will figure out the policies to implement with it.
Yeah, it is. It is mind blowing, the idea that suddenly this would violate the anti-donation clause. Especially, we just talked about HB 11, paid family leave, $3,000 payments for 3 months to people who have a baby or adopt a baby. I mean, whether that's good policy or bad, it violates the anti-donation clause no more or less than this. Same with previous rounds of rebates that we've seen. I, of course, disagree with you. While I'd love to have the $30,000, we do not move the needle substantially in New Mexico until we cut taxes. If we eliminated our personal income tax and reformed our gross receipts tax, New Mexico would be well on its way to being economically successful and socially more successful. We'd be getting out of the bottom of all the good lists and the top of all the bad lists. So,
Yeah, and Paula, in New Mexico, instead of growing our economy, being a place where businesses want to work and thrive and have an educated workforce that can go to work in those, we'll just ignore all of that and then create some of these band-aid programs to throw some money at very select groups to overcome all the big strategic shortcomings of our state policy.
all right, final thing that we are going to discuss here is a excellent John Trever cartoon from Sunday's paper. They kind of moved the political cartoon around a little bit, so I don't think it's necessarily seen as easily by people, but this one is worth pointing out. It's a ornate door looking like a legislative body with the New Mexico Legislature sign above the door. Sign below says, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." And you have the bills that look like I'm just a bill from the cartoons back in the old days. Those bills read: "Get tough, criminal penalties, in catch and release, junk EV mandates, repeal state income tax, cut film subsidies." And these are bills that uh, die and have no hope of passage in New Mexico's legislature. Of course, while the cartoon itself is excellent, I have just a few additions, those being school choice or education accountability, spending restraints, reducing government waste. Interestingly enough, Senator J. Block has a bill to broadly replicate Doge. Talk about that briefly. Limit the governor's emergency powers and preserve traditional and affordable energy, to name just a few. Of course, Doge and cutting spending, very tough to do when you're literally sitting on piles of cash, because the advocates will always be there, as they always are, but they'll actually have some legitimacy to their arguments when you have the kind of money flowing in that New Mexico has.
But Paul, they make the same arguments at the federal level when we're borrowing money to do the same things. So yeah, they are shameless in their advocacy of spending money.
Well, it's all situational. We've kind of come to grips with that reality. But the fact is that yes, these bills and many others that would improve New Mexico are not likely to get much in the way of traction in Santa Fe. And again, there is only one way to address this issue. We need to change the folks that we elect to Santa Fe, specifically the legislature and the governor, and change the approach that the state takes to public policy, because what we have done is has led us to being one of the poorest states in the nation, with the lowest educational outcomes, the highest crime rates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Paul, we're the poorest state in the nation with the highest amount of money in the bank. Go figure. It's kind of mind-boggling where we've gotten to on that.
All right. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.